What you're about to hear is based on actual events. Listener discretion is advised.
In the mind of Armin Mavis, lust has become depravity. Man has become meat. A long-dormant fantasy is now an insatiable desire that must be fulfilled. A need that is as real and necessary as air or water. Through the marvel of the internet, he has found his dinner. And now all that is left to do is eat. I remember being forced to go outside to get things done. These days, a questionable introvert can stay indoors and order just about anything they need. Ain't that right, Karen? Karen came in the mail a couple months ago. She's a real doll. I call her my forever sweetheart. But lately she's been a little quiet. Too quiet. Karen, don't you want to say hi? I know what it is. It's your hair, isn't it? How the hell was I supposed to know that beet juice would make it purple? I'm not a professional, but I found a way, girl. Madison Reed, my friends with fading ends and questionable roots. This is how we can get this done, from home. That got her attention. She just about fell out of her chair there. Upsy daisy, Care Bear. There used to be two options. Head over to the salon and drop an absurd amount of money to get the right color. Or grab a box from the drugstore and pray that you did it right. Madison Reed clients rave of how their new hair color has changed their lives for the better. Women love the results. Gorgeous, shiny, multi-dimensional looking hair. This is gray covering, game-changing color you can do at home. What makes Madison Reed hair color unique is that it's crafted by master colorists who blend nuances of light, dark, cool, and warm to create over 45 gorgeous multi-tonal shades. Find your perfect shade at madison-reed.com. Monstruo listeners receive 10% off plus free shipping on their first color kit by entering the code Monstruo. That's MONSTRUO, code Monstruo at checkout for 10% off plus free shipping on your first purchase. That's madison-reed.com. Promo code Monstruo at checkout.
Armin arrives at the castle station before Burns' train is due to arrive. He stands on the platform looking to the east, craning his neck to see further down the tracks. The platform reminds him of industry, like petroleum mixed with dirt. Train patrons trickle onto the platform in preparation for the return journey back to Berlin. Armin is wearing some of his nicer clothes, excited to greet his new guest and wanting to make a good first impression. A low rumble rises from the ground. The train is not far now. The platform begins to fill with more people in anticipation of the new arrivals. The overlap of voices grows to a roar. You can just make out the shape of the train in the distance, the humidity skewing its form. Time begins to crawl. The train is close enough to see, yet still so far away. Burns steps off the train and onto the platform where he stands for a moment. He takes a look around, scanning the crowd for Armin. Armin sees him immediately, but doesn't move. He watches from a distance, keeping perfectly still. He continues to glare at Burns, inspecting him. He admires his sporty figure. He looks good. Good enough to eat. Before long, Burns begins to walk, but without direction, still searching for Armin. Armin approaches Bernd from behind and places his hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body for the first time. Bernd spins around, slightly startled by the tight grasp, but relieved when he recognizes whose hand it is. After a nervous smile and an awkward handshake, Bernd leans in for a hug. Armin sees how excited his new victim is, and he recommends they leave, leading the way, with his meat trailing just behind him. They walk silently, waiting until they are alone to speak. The commotion diminishes as they weave past the crowd and eventually reach Armin's car and climb in. The world outside mutes abruptly as the doors seal them away from the outside. The absence of sound seems almost louder than silence itself. Armin starts the car and shifts into drive with an affirming click. Bernd removes his coat, and as they start to leave the city, he turns to Armin. He can't wait any longer. His palms are moist with anxiety. He reaches over and touches Armin's chest. He presses his hand flat against his heart. Armin draws a sharp breath at the sensation. Bernd then moves his hand down, massaging his thigh. The rain creates a curtain of concealment, only broken by the whir and the oscillation of the wipers running at full speed. Armin's heart races, and his breath quickens. Bernd's hand can feel Armin's pulse. If there are sights to see in Castle, they go unnoticed. The pair roar down the road, leaving a vapor trail in the car's wake. A constant spray of fallen rain spun up by the tires. Soon, the waiting will be over. At the farmhouse, there's a thickness in the still air. It is quiet, but there is a looming anxiety present and palpable. The two enter, and Armin offers his guest coffee. Bernd, alone, undresses completely. A few moments later, the aroma of fresh coffee precedes Armin as he returns to the living room to find a nude Bernd spread across the sofa. Bernd wants Armin to admire his dinner. They abandon the coffee and go upstairs. The staircase is wide, but steep. It's difficult to follow Armin as he leads Bernd by the wrist. At the end of the hall, a small sign hangs above the door. It reads, "Sparrow's Nest." In the center of the room is a large wooden table. In the center of the table is a knife. The surface of the table is speckled by cuts and gouges, marring its finish and revealing a lighter color beneath the surface. Above it hangs a single bulb. Along the stained wall of chipped paint is a wooden bench, and in the corner, a bed. On the far end stands a camera on a tripod aimed at the table. Closest to the door in the ceiling is a large hook, and next to the door hangs a leather apron. This is Armin's slaughter room. Bernd is more turned on than he has ever been. They fall into the bed. It springs, making a high-pitched squawk as their weight settles. Bernd grasps for breath as Armin bites his neck. He savors the salt in his lover's sweat as he vigorously nibbles down his collar to his chest. Bernd fumbles with his pants, too engrossed in the pain. He wants more. Armin can tell. Armin doesn't want to disappoint him, so he slaps him across the face. Bernd's eyebrows furl with a hint of anger. He's expecting more. He watches Armin's silhouette stand above him and remove his pants. His form looms in the shadow of the darkened room. The dark form grows as Armin leans in and forces Bernd's knees up to his chest. Bernd is breathing rapidly, mouth open wide. In one quick motion, Armin's dark form springs upright, thrusting his hips forward. He forces himself inside. Burnt screams through his clenched teeth. Armin thrusts again, each thrust ending in a satisfying smack. Burnt howls for more, as Armin releases an animalistic grunt, thrusting one last time before collapsing on top of him. They lay there for a moment in a heap of sweat and exhaustion. A stillness returns to the room. Armin removes himself. Their skin peels apart, still tacky with sweat. Burnt stretches out, dissatisfied that it is over already. He snatches the woolen blanket from the bed and grasps it around his shoulders. He thinks for a moment that Armin may be too feeble for the task ahead, but he has left his life behind now. There is no turning back. Soon, he will discover that this decision he briefly contemplated was nothing but a farce. There is no decision for meat, much like a goat has no decision to make once he's inside the slaughterhouse. Armin gets up and walks into the next room, within a few seconds returning with a handful of sleeping pills. He orders Burnt to gulp them down with cold medicine. After several handfuls of pills, Armin opens a bottle of schnapps and hands it to him. Burnt presses the bottle against his lips and tips it up, taking a loud gulp. A little schnapps runs down his chin and onto his chest. In a few moments, his meat will be ready for him. Armin prepares the room and excites Burnt with the details of how he will kill him. He mimes hanging his body upside down from the hook in the ceiling and removing his head. Burnt can't stand to wait any longer. He throws the blanket from his shoulders as he stands up and presents his erection. He yells,
"Bite it off! Bite it off!"
Armin presses record on the camera. The lens and the iris buzz as they fix their position. A red dot floats in the obscure corner, just outside the ring of light cast on the floor. It shows a large portion of the slaughter room. The table in the center glows white, while the camera tries to adjust for the stark contrast created by the soul-hanging lamp. In the background, behind the shadow, the bed they shared. Armin complies with Burnt's request. He kneels in front of him and opens his mouth wide, placing each testicle between his teeth. He begins to squeeze, and Burnt begins to hum.
Armin bites harder, as Burnt exclaims,
"Bite it off!"
Saliva begins to drool from his mouth. Armin bites harder and harder. Burnt's reaction pleases Armin. Armin turns his attention to the evening's appetizer, Burnt's penis. He fits as much in his mouth as possible, attempting to bite it off at the base. He wants a substantial portion if they are going to consume it together. Burnt places his hand on Armin's shoulder as they lock eyes, his face turning red, and Armin clamps his jaw, cutting his teeth back and forth. An attempt at sawing his way through what would provide too difficult to just bite off. Raw flesh is tougher than he thought. Frustrated, Armin concedes and grabs his knife, pressing it hard against the still somewhat erect penis. Burnt stands tense, braced, statuesque. Shadows skew from his nude form. He no longer looks like a man, but something else. Burnt releases his breath all at once and relaxes his rigid frame. He is ready. Armin can see that. With a swift motion, he cuts, pressing down as hard as he can. The leading edge hits the table underneath. Instantly, a stream of blood begins to trickle down Burnt's leg, as an animalistic scream erupts from inside him. has lost his identity. He is no longer a man. He is a piece of meat. Another piece of meat, once part of him, sits on the table, still. He stumbles back, suddenly woozy. Blood squirts out of the exposed vein with every heartbeat. You can hear the spurts of blood hitting the floor, splattering long crimson streaks. The room fills with a metallic fragrance. He cannot hear his own screaming. He stumbles back into a chair as the two silently stare at the meat on the table. After a minute or so, the pain has become a numbness. The severed penis looks artificial, alien. Armin sets the tip of his blade down against the table and draws it through the flesh lengthwise. Burnt watches as it flops in two pieces. His eyes widen and his attention renews. He reaches down between his legs and feels the gush of blood. It's a warm flow. Armin stands silent, still waiting for his victim's reaction. This is the climax that their shared fantasies have reached. Burnt opens his mouth and bites down hard on the raw meat of his own penis. Liquid squirts between his teeth, and it tastes of salty metal. The sinewy texture makes it difficult to take a bite. Burnt bites again, pulling his cheeks back to bare his molars. With his teeth gnawing hard, he tugs on the meat, trying to tear off a piece to chew. But it is too resistant, too rubbery. Armin foresaw this issue and offers to cook it up for both of them to try. Burnt agrees, extending his arm and opening his hand. The filleted phallus is limp in his palm. Armin takes his cut of meat to the kitchen. His steps resound triumphant as he traverses the house. He washes the halves and fills the pot to boil. Armin lights the stove and places the pot over the fire. The metal pops as it heats. Tiny bubbles begin to form and wiggle to the surface. Once boiling, the steam is rising quickly. Armin plops the meat in the water. He's careful not to splash and covers it to let it boil for a few moments before dipping it in ice water. The cubes crack with a rapid change of temperature. He seasons the blanched meat with salt, pepper, and fresh garlic. He drops a few chunks of Burnt's fat into the sauté pan. It withers and melts with rapid crackles. Burnt's fat coats the bottom of the pan like pork grease, releasing stench both new and appealing to Armin, filling the house. He gently places each piece of the meat flat in the pan and begins to fry. Wafts of odor flow from the pan into the air as the edges begin to brown. Suddenly, Burnt yells from upstairs. His voice seems small and distant to Armin in the kitchen. He rushes upstairs to attend to the wailing calls. Mere moments pass before Armin is able to return, only to discover the savory aroma giving way to the odor of burnt meat. He grimaces at the sight of the ruined meal. His cheeks flush from anger, and he makes a disappointed grunt. He plates the sautéed penis anyway and presents it to Burnt in spite of his embarrassment. By now, his victim's skin is pale, and he can't truly express any sort of disappointment. The meat has now shriveled, hardly recognizable. The brown edges turned black and charred. Burnt attempts to eat it anyway, hoping to salvage his fantasy. He stabs it with a fork, and for a brief moment his glee returns. To think of a piece of him prepared like a sausage brought a glint of joy back into his eyes. He parts his lips with a smack of saliva. His tongue slithers out to meet his bite. His eyes lock with Armin's, so they can enjoy this together. He rips off a mouthful and begins to chew. Immediately, a grimace forms on his face, brow furrowed and eyes narrow. He spits it back onto the plate, unable to consume the unappetizing meal. Disheartened and getting cold, he requests that Armin draw him a warm bath. Armin scurries to the lavatory. He sits on the side of the tub and turns on the hot water. The handle squeaks and the pipe rattles as the water pressure fills them. The water bursts from the faucet, and Armin adjusts the cold water to get the temperature right. It is Berndt's last bath, after all. Armin's footsteps become louder as they return from down the hall. Bernd hears him coming, but doesn't move. He is weak, and his body is conserving all energy in an attempt to survive his injury. Armin helps Bernd to his feet. His once athletic body seems frail and unsteady now. Armin positions himself beneath Bernddt's shoulder and walks him down the hall, step by step, drip by drip. There is a bright light at the end of a dark tunnel from which a white noise emanates, the noise of running water. Teal tiles line the wall, interrupted only by the matching teal toilet and bathtub. The colors are hideous, and for a moment Bernd finds it comical that he is thinking about such a trivial matter. Carefully, lovingly, Armin lowers Bernd into the steaming water. The contact between the water and his open wound sends a thunderous sting through his entire body. Tendrils of blood slither into the water, mixing and turning the bath into a dark crimson of human soup. He rests his head against the side of the tub, wallowing in his own bloody water. The warmth eases the constrained blood vessels, allowing his blood to flow faster. Armin shuts off the faucet, and silence fills the room, only broken by the occasional drip, each one sending ever-widening circles through the surface of the reddened water. Bernd asks Armin to leave him for a while, as he fades away. Returning to the swallow's nest, Armin retrieves his failed first attempt at preparing human flesh. He kicks himself once more, hating to have wasted such a treat, and with a guest over, no less. He returns to the kitchen and cubes the meat before feeding it to his dog. Strings of spit trail from the dog's snout as he engulfs the meal. The gnawing and gnashing of meat combined with fantastic gulps of air make it seem as if he hadn't eaten for weeks. Finished, the dog licks his chops and sits back looking at Armin for more. The dog will eat almost anything, but Armin thought, this is a good sign that Bernd is delicious. Armin returns once again to check on him, with a smile on his face. In fact, he seems comfortable and content. So Armin goes to the next room and relaxes with a good book to wait. He begins reading an old favorite, Star Trek, The Trellisane Confrontation. This particular book features one plotline where Dr. McCoy dines with a cannibalistic culture. Armin's mind drifts off to another world where everyone is a cannibal. Startled by a loud thud from the bathroom, Armin recoils, his daydream interrupted. The book falls to the floor, pages fanned out, collapsing in a flutter. Armin races to the lavatory to find Bernddt's nude body collapsed on the floor. He cradles him in his arms, and Berndt stares up at him. His eyes roll back in his sockets, and he loses consciousness. Armin checks his pulse. He's still alive, his skin stained with bloody bathwater. He picks his limp body off the floor and carries him to bed. He covers him and shuts off the light. It won't be much longer now. Too wired to sleep, Armin resumes his book. He can't concentrate on the adventure anymore, though. He's too busy thinking about his own. As soon as his victim is dead, he can live out the rest of his fantasy. Armin's thoughts shudder when he hears another loud thud. He finds Bernd collapsed again, this time next to the bed. Armin sits on his knees and hauls Bernd to his chest. Bernd utters,
"I have to piss,"
at a volume barely above a whisper. His eyes glaze over and close. The room is dark, with only moonlight trickling in through the window. The scene is of two contrasts, black and white. Armin holds Bernd close, considering what he is going to do. For Bernd, the fantasy is over now, and there is only suffering. Armin can see that. He leans down and places a kiss on his forehead, his skin cool and damp. He is taking too long to die. So Armin rests Bernd's body back down and retrieves the knife. He brings its peak to the valley of Bernd's neck, just below where his jaw meets his ear, and pushes in effortlessly. The blade slides through the neck easily to the other side, as blood flows everywhere. For a brief moment, the body tenses, the chest heaves, and then nothing. It has given up. It gently gurgles, and the lungs fill with blood. The struggle leaves the body completely. The bladder releases, urine suddenly pooling onto the floor. The bowels also release, instantly filling the room with the smell of death. It was easier than Armin had thought to kill a man. Now, for the fun. Armin places a bar between the legs of the carcass, each side fastened to the ankle. He drags the body back down the hall to the swallow's nest. Some of the boards making up the floor in the hallway protrude ever so slightly, creating an irregular surface. The lifeless body shuffles down the hall, the head bouncing and jerking side to side off each uneven board. The repetitive thud of the head bouncing, combined with the belabored gait and the body's heavy skid, echoed an eerie rhythm. Armin uses all his strength to hoist the carcass onto the hook. The metal meets with a confident clang. The light in the center of the room accentuates the form swaying from the ceiling. Armin dons a leather apron as he admires his catch. He walks to the camera and once again presses record. The butcher grips his knife lightly, beginning to carefully carve, like a conductor with a baton. Cut placement needs to be precise to minimize loss of usable meat. Armin's mind is on the task at hand, focused intently. He places his first cut, eviscerating the carcass. The internal organs spill out swiftly, sloshing onto the large tin tub below, making a weighted, soggy plop. He finishes the inside, removing the organs from the body. He grabs a fistful of hair to steady the body and stares into the eyes as he begins to carve the head from the torso. The skin separates and the muscles are cut away. He digs the knife between the vertebrae and the head falls, landing on top of the mass of discarded organs. Armin kicks it aside and the tub scrapes across the floor. Then he starts with the crotch, splitting the carcass all the way down to the neck. When he reaches bone, he uses a heavy cleaver to hack it apart. The hacks make the meat quiver on the hook, the force of each rippling through the flesh. It splits apart suddenly, swinging out of balance. A pleased expression forms on Armin's face. For as hard as the work is, this is a labor of love. Burnt's body will soon be a part of him forever, and with it, a sense of brotherhood, a friend that could never leave him. Armin cuts off each arm at the shoulder, laying the pieces on the table. He sections the torso at the hip. The two legs dangle alone as he positions the torso on the table. Armin finally places the legs on the table, next to the rest of the pieces of this human puzzle. Raw meat has a certain smell, but the raw human meat is intoxicating. His cleaver in hand, Armin hacks the feet and hands off at the ankles and wrists. He strikes hard enough to sever them with one blow, burying the blade in the wood underneath. He sections the legs into 5 pieces each: the calf, the thigh, the hip, the knees, and buttocks. He cuts the arms into the forearm, the bicep, the shoulder, and the elbows. Most of this he can butcher into choice cuts of meat. He then switches to a fillet knife, cutting meat from the bone. He cuts as close to the bone as he can, attempting not to leave any meat behind. He tosses the clean bones into a pile. The remaining edible portions he carefully places in freezer bags for storage. Armin buries the scraps, the bones, hands, feet, organs, skull, in the garden. The knees he plans to grind into flour, if the mood to bake ever strikes him. Armin carries the bags into the kitchen. The freezer door opens with a tired groan, and the frozen dense air pours out on all sides. Armin removes the freezer's false bottom and neatly stacks his collection of freezer bags inside. He returns the false bottom, concealing the bags from anyone not looking too hard. Altogether, he got 65 pounds of meat. Set aside is a portion of rump steak, a meal he plans for the next evening. Finally ready for bed, Armin passes through the living room where his coffee still sits untouched. He is exhausted from the slaughter. He drains the blood-stained water from the tub, watches it as it swirls and gurgles down the drain. He clicks off the light and walks to the other end of the hall. He removes his apron and returns it to the hook by the door. He shuts off the camera, he turns off the light, walks to his bed, and flops across it, completely spent. His muscles ache, and he drifts to sleep quickly, dreaming of tomorrow's dinner. Armin sets the table with his mother's best china and silverware. He replaces the candle with a fresh one and sets the candlestick at the center of the table. He pops the cork from a South African red to let it breathe before dinner. He runs his hand down the lace tablecloth, soothing any wrinkles. He wants everything to be perfect. He returns to the kitchen and begins cooking. The aroma of minced garlic fills the room. The steak is crusted with salt, pepper, and nutmeg before being placed in the pan. It sputters in applause. He sears both sides before covering and reducing the heat. It is a large portion and needs to cook for several minutes. Next, he pulls the princess croquettes from the oven. They are a delicate potato pastry that Armin thought would complement the meat. He places several bite-sized pieces on his plate, next to the steamed Brussels sprouts drizzled with green pepper sauce. Armin sets the lid of the pan aside, releasing a plume of steam that makes Armin emotional. He carves the steak into several slices. This time, it is cooked perfectly. The gradient of pink is beautiful. With several pieces on his plate, he returns to the dining room, eager to eat his dinner, to feed the hunger in his psyche. Over the next year and a half, Armin consumes 54 pounds of human flesh. Time goes on, and Armin soon realizes that he is running out quicker than he hoped. At first, he reserves his meals of human flesh for holidays and special occasions. Soon he finds himself in a haze, his days at work blurring together, his only real memorable moments being dinner with his victim. He needs the meat to survive, and there isn't much left. Armin's satisfaction must be quenched. He places another ad, looking for another willing participant.
Are you between 18 and 25 years old? Normal and healthy? Is it your desire to put an end to your life, but want something more meaningful? Then come to me. I'll slaughter you and use your body in delicious pies and schnitzel. Interested? Then please apply with an indication of age, height, and weight, preferably with a photo. Frankie.
Sitting back in his underwear at his cluttered desk is Armin. Sleepless nights spent scouring the forums for another as serious as him. His eyes are tired and sunken, his skin cool and pale. He sits nearly asleep in his chair when his computer dings. He has an email, an Austrian student.
How many boys have you slaughtered?
Armin straightens his back, several vertebrae popping. He begins to type.
Let's just say I've got experience. In any case, you wouldn't be the first.
He sends the email and gets no response. He has had several replies to the ad, but none quite right. Months pass, and Armin is still searching for his next meal, when a loud and urgent knock draws his attention away from his computer. The panes of glass rattle in the door from the pounding. Armin swings the door open wide, squinting as his eyes adjust to the light. The police show him a warrant for his arrest and to search the premises. The Austrian student reported his interaction with Armin to the police. The handcuffs dig into his wrists, and he's led to the kitchen and forcibly sat in a chair. The freezer is open, and the concealed contents spread out on the counter. Armin assures them it is a wild pig. However, he knows they aren't there for wild pig. The police confiscate the meat from the freezer, a camera, dozens of pornographic VHS cassettes, 3 knives, an axe, and a butcher's apron from Armin's home. The phone rings a couple of times before Armin's lawyer answers. Armin blurts it out.
I've killed a man and cut him into pieces. And I've eaten some.
Later, Armin sits in court with confidence. There is no law against cannibalism in Germany, and the tape proves he was assisting Bernd in suicide rather than murdering him. Armin is convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. But the butcher's confidence was ill-placed. The hand of justice is, after all, controlled by the public's outrage of an injustice. And soon, the outcry was so loud that the law itself had to accommodate it. An appeal changed the ruling to a murder conviction and a term of life in prison. Armin Meiwes sits quietly, peacefully. He takes a moment to rest his eyes and closes the book he was reading. The The blue-green light in his cell is harsh to aging eyes, but other than that, he has few complaints. He is no longer alone, and he is content. He takes a deep, solemn breath and senses a change in the air. Soon, once again, it will be spring. He feels the warmth in the air returning, and the comfort reminds him of home. Now, a vegetarian, the taste of his prey is but a distant memory. He only remembers the sense of satisfaction tingling throughout his body, as it does again now, with just a memory. The memory of a man who will always be part of him, forever.
Monstruo is an Incongruity Media production. If you've enjoyed this experience, please subscribe and leave a positive review. You can find out more by searching for Monstruo Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or visit us at monstruopodcast.com. This show is produced, hosted, and written by Jack Luna and Mike Boudet. Additional writing by Tyler Bell and Evan Ziegelman. Research by Hagar Barak. Sound design and editing by Jonathan McMichael and Robert Ravelli. Original score by Leon Rogers. Art by Denny Ray.